And today's challenge is chasing down a persistent gas smell after every fill up. Anybody who's been around this series of cars knows that most likely the problem is in the gas tank, fuel sending unit or pump that live in this area. So the first thing to do in this case is I'm just going to take a look under there to see if we've got the typical fuel spill level. The car was filled up earlier today, smelled up the entire area, so I'm thinking we're going to see it when we take the seat out. Okay, first step is pull up the front of the seat, which is easy enough. Next step is there's a hook in the back, and you actually have to push the seat back in further and then pull up and out, and it will pop right out. It's kind of hard to explain, but easy to do. Okay, so got this side up, push it back, raise it, pull it out. All right. Pardon the filthy area under the seat, folks. This is the first time I have ever had this out. So we're going to check out both sides here just to see what we got going on. Okay, and I can definitely smell fuel, and I thought I was dry at first, but if you look close, you can see that there has been some seepage around the outside. The good news is I don't see any fuel inside on the sending unit itself here. Where it occasionally the actual cap will crack. The runners, I believe in mid 2011 production particularly, had a problem where they would crack and they would weep fuel out, but it will pool inside this this cap here. This is set on very low torque. It's, I believe, a 3 Newton meter tightening torque. Okay. I think we found the bigger problem, folks. Yes, I would say there is a fuel leak here. Now the trick is I'm going to clean it up and try to determine if it's all from a bad gasket or if this housing itself is cracked. Fuel everywhere. There's a lot in there, folks. Alright, now the point of this exercise, as much fun as it was not to really clean this thing to surgical conditions, but was really just so I could get down to the base plastic and see if there are cracks. At least there's still a good amount of fuel leakage in here. So I'm going to go on to the next step. Alright, I've cleaned it up about as much as I can, got it all dry. Now I'm going to try just shaking the car to see if I can create some fuel pressure in the tank and just see if anything happens back here. You can see the fuel sloshing around in there just under the level of the plug. And I can't really say definitively that it might not be leaking through the plug. Seems to be wet there. I don't know if that's just because I couldn't dry it out or because that's the source. And just FYI, I'm sitting right at 3/4 of a tank, and that's where the fuel actually reaches up onto that white plastic cap right around the level of the pins. So if you're wondering if you can keep your fuel at 3/4 of a tank and not have a leak if you have a bad cap or gasket, the answer would be no. And thinking in terms of the fuel actually coming up through this pin, through this connector rather, I've got a couple ideas that may or may not help. And you can see there's a couple pins unused, so any fuel could flow straight through. Other than that, the thing I noticed was that these little gaskets are there for some reason, and they're designed to be down inside the housing, and yet they aren't. So I'm going to fix that by just pushing them down into the housing, and then work on preventing anything coming up through those holes. Okay, and trick here is just to find a suitable pick-shaped object, in this case just a fine flat blade screwdriver that I travel with, and poke the gaskets down into the hole one at a time. And it'll take a while, so I won't make you watch. Okay, another thing I noticed was that this blue gasket is tucked up in there, and it's apparently supposed to seal around this circumference, but you know, it was twisted. I don't know if you noticed in the videos, but you can see it's been deformed. So I'm thinking that might also be there to prevent fuel flow. Now, in the meantime, before I put it back on, we've still got those two open holes to deal with. So I'm going to handle that by tucking in a little piece of plastic into the top of this this connector and just push it down firmly into the bottom, where it should, if everything works properly, jam up any opportunity for fuel to flow through there. So you can see it's tucked in there pretty good. I'll do the same for the other hole here, and hey, it can't hurt. Okay, now assuming that these gaskets are there to prevent fuel flow, which is maybe a reach, and that now no fuel can come up through those, and that I have better seated this gasket, I'm not sure it's 100%, I'm going to plug this back on firmly. Oh boy. And it takes some serious pressure. I'm not sure it's even clicked on yet. Let's see. Yeah, that's it. So it's now all the way down. It took some serious pressure. Now, phase 2 will be to see if that made any difference. Okay, a week or so later, filled up. Smell a little bit of gas, not anything like it used to be. The puddle is rainwater. So let's take the cover off and see what we got. Okay, clearly we've got a leak, and interestingly, these have kind of popped off. They've I pushed them in fully, and they look like they've broken off with portions still down inside. That's almost like it was pressurized or something, and the top of this is wet. So there's no way that, because this has been parked overnight, there's no way in the world that got wet other than fuel coming up through the wire holes and pouring out over the top of the connector. You can see how wet the connector is now that it's off, and how different those insulators look than they used to. This is wet up, around, through the whole thing, and you can see gas standing inside that connector, which I believe is up above the level that it was in the rest of the cap. So I'm going to try to dry it all out now. And if you really need to dry out something fast, you might pick up one of these. Okay, that I believe should have displaced anything resembling gas. And I can see flow inside that plug. It's clearly while it didn't entirely displace all the gas behind it, it looks like there's flow coming up, as I suspected, through this plug, and that I suspect would explain that discoloration on the number 3 pin there. Okay, I put the plug back in place and blew it again, and you can see it blew out all the liquid. There's it's still maybe a little residue left, but I don't think that's the leak. I think the leak is inside the plug. So at any rate, my original hypothesis still stands, that the cap is the problem. It's a different symptom than I thought it might be, and very likely that might be different than your leak or somebody else's leak, but the same repair will fix them both. In other words, replacing this entire cap with the feed through, the leaky feed through, should take care of the problem. Unfortunately, the part is about 2,000 miles from here, so it's going to be a little while before I get it fixed. In the meantime, I'll just have to live with a little bit of gas, and I'll make sure that the cap is down as snug as I can get it, so that it will minimize the amount of leakage coming through this thing. Yeah, I hope. Well, happy day. I finally caught up with my parts to fix this problem, so let's get right on it. Okay, only a little bit of gas pooling in the back side here, as you can see. Hopefully we'll make that stop here shortly. First step, I'm going to go ahead and take off the connector. Take off the nuts that hold the cap on. And as often the case, the last one's the most difficult to get off. Okay, now this is where you're happy you have a 2010 through 2012. After that, they went to a twist-in style cap that gives people just loads of trouble. So this one should just be a matter of prying the old one out of the position down here. Okay, here we go. All right, and pouring the little bit of gas that was in there all over myself, followed by releasing this tab. There it is. Okay, so lay in the new gasket, being careful to place it so it's fully seated. Put the trim ring in, hold everything in place, and next, this one's there's really not that much to check, but this is pushed on. Hopefully you get a solid click to indicate it's fully seated. Try to pull it off. If it won't come, it should be seated. Okay, then pretty much just make sure everything's still secure. Okay, the next step, put the metal ring back on top. Let's make absolutely sure everything's still lined up. Put the metal ring on top. Start the nuts. To make sure that we got a good seal, and keep in mind all we're doing is compressing a metal ring into a plastic disc that's pushing against a rubber gasket or silicone gasket, so it doesn't take a whole lot of pressure to get that job done. You know, and certainly this is mechanically much more than adequate for holding this in place. And then finally, we'll plug in the plug after making sure the gasket, the blue gasket that I had issues with before, is fully seated. And push it down. You may or may not get a good satisfying click in the process, but it should have slipped over. I can see this, the notch is captured by the plug. This is tucked out of the way. So okay, one final thing. I'm going to go ahead and wipe out in here, just so if I do smell gas just shortly after doing this job, I won't really have to worry about the problem being with what I just did. All right, so we got that out of the way. We'll put the cap back on, make sure the gasket material looks good all the way around. This being hopefully the final time I have to open this thing this century. And I have this set to a very low torque, by the way. So that's sealed, it's down. We should be good. The one thing I do want to do is turn on the ignition, make sure we are showing fuel level. Okay, and here we go. Oh, that's right where it was. Seems like it's got fuel pressure. I'd say it's a win. Let's put the back seat back in. Yay.